The rope bit into Clara Sutton's wrists so deep she stopped feeling her hands within the first minute. She had been walking the ridge trail back from the Harmon farm. The same trail she had walked twice a week for 6 months, carrying medicine and food to old Margaret Harmon, who could not make the ride into town anymore. It was late afternoon. The light was going amber and long across the grass. She had been thinking about nothing more dangerous than supper. Then 4 hands grabbed her from behind, and the world became a blur of struggle and rope and the sound of men laughing. They carried her down the embankment, down to the rail line. The Union Southern ran through the valley floor 300 feet below the ridge. It was a freight line, mostly lumber and ore and cattle, but twice a day a passenger train came through, and everyone in Cutter's Bend, Wyoming, knew the schedule by heart because the whistle was the loudest sound in the valley and you could set a watch by it. The evening run was due in 40 minutes. They laid her across the rails, tied her wrists to the left line and her ankles to the right, spread eagled face up across both rails so she could see the sky and the tops of the pines and the first pale star appearing above the mountain. She screamed until her throat went raw. She fought until the ropes had torn both wrists bloody. She twisted her body until the rails pressed bruises into her spine that she would carry for weeks. Nothing gave. The men left. Their boots crunched up the gravel embankment, and then there was silence. 40 minutes. She turned her head and looked down the track. The rails ran arrow straight into the shadow of the mountain pass. Somewhere in that darkness a train was already moving. She could not hear it yet. She could feel it, the faintest tremor in the rail beneath her cheek, so slight she thought at first she was imagining it. She was not imagining it. And then, from somewhere above her on the ridge, the sound of a horse running flat out. The sound of something burning. The crackle and roar of the brush fire the men had set along the embankment to slow down anyone who might try to come after her. A single rider came through that fire. She saw him before she heard him. A dark shape against the orange and smoke, horse surging down the embankment at a speed that should have been suicidal on that grade, leaning low over the animal's neck, one hand free and reaching. The flames caught his coat sleeve. He did not slow down. He hit the gravel at the bottom, yanked the horse sideways, was off it before it had fully stopped. He dropped to his knees at the rail beside her, and in the firelight she could see his face, jaw set, eyes sharp and gray and completely focused, and in his hand was a blade already moving. The tremor in the rail became a vibration. The vibration became a sound. The sound became a roar. "Hold still," he said, not a request. A fact. The rope at her wrist parted. He was already moving to her ankles. The roar filled the valley. The ground shook. Clara saw the headlamp of the engine appear around the curve of the mountain, a single blinding eye in the smoke-dark air, and she understood in the animal part of her brain that there was no longer enough time. The rope at her ankles parted. He grabbed her around the waist and threw himself sideways off the rail bed, rolling them both down the gravel bank into the drainage ditch below the line, covering her body with his own as the train hit the space she had occupied half a second before. The sound was total, a wall of iron and compressed air and screaming metal that lasted 4 seconds and then was gone, leaving only the fire on the embankment and the thunder of the train fading south and the sound of 2 people breathing in the bottom of a ditch. Clara Sutton lay underneath a stranger's weight, her wrists bleeding, her ears ringing, and she was alive. She was alive. The man above her lifted his head. His sleeve was still smoldering. He looked at her face with those gray eyes and said, in that same level voice, like a man confirming something he had already decided, "I have got you. Do not move yet." Clara Sutton had spent 24 years making her own way through a world that did not slow down for women who needed it to. She had buried her father at 17, managed the family's failing homestead at 18, walked away from it at 20 when the bank finally took what was left, and rebuilt herself from nothing in a town that had not asked for her. She did not know this man's name. She did not know that he had ridden through actual fire to reach her. She did not know that the men who had tied her to those rails had done it on the orders of someone she had trusted completely. She did not know that everything was about to change. But she was breathing, and she pressed her face against the cold gravel and closed her eyes and let herself, just for one moment, be held. This channel tells the stories that deserve to be told all the way through. Not the comfortable version. Not the version where you already know everyone gets out safe. The real version, where the danger is actual and the stakes are real and the people inside the story are just people doing the best they can with what they have. What you're about to hear is the story of Clara Sutton and Reid Calloway, of a woman who had survived everything life had thrown at her on her own terms, and a man who had spent 2 years trying to outride the wreckage of his past. Of how one evening on a rail line in the Wyoming Valley became the beginning of something neither of them had any right to expect. If you're new here, subscribe right now before this goes any further. This is what this channel does. Every single time. Now stay with her. There is a specific kind of strength that forms in a person who has never had the option of being weak. It does not announce itself. It does not look like what strength looks like in stories, square-jawed and unbending and righteous. It looks like a woman rising before dawn to split her own wood because there is no one else to do it. Like a woman learning to negotiate with feed merchants who assume she does not know what she is talking about, and winning and not making a point of it. Like a woman who lost everything twice and rebuilt twice and carried the weight of both losses inside her like stones she had gotten too used to didn't notice anymore. Clara Sutton had been carrying stones a long time. She had come to Cutter's Bend 2 years ago with $30, a good horse, and the willingness to work any job that was honest. She had taken the nursing work at first only because it was available and she needed money before winter. She had stayed because she was good at it and because the people who needed her, Margaret Harmon on the Ridge, the Delaney children with their winter fevers, old Silas Pruitt who had no family to speak of, those people became her reason for being there when a town otherwise gave her none. She had not made enemies in Cutter's Bend, or she had not thought she had. She had not known, until those hands grabbed her on the ridge trail, that someone in that town had been watching her for months and counting the cost of what she had seen and what she knew. She had not known that surviving was going to require someone else's hands as well as her own. That was the thing she would need the longest to make peace with. Not the fear, not the pain, the fact that she had needed someone, the fact that without him, she would not have gotten out. We begin on a Thursday in September of 1879, the last day of summer that had felt longer than most, in a valley that was about to become a very different place than it had been the morning before. Cutter's Bend sat in a long green valley at the foot of the Absaroka Range in north-central Wyoming Territory, the kind of place that looked peaceful from a distance and was mostly peaceful up close, except for the parts that were not. The Union Southern Rail line ran along the valley floor, dividing the flat farmland to the east from the timber operations to the west. The town itself sat on the east side of the tracks, a main street of perhaps 14 buildings, a livery, a rail depot that doubled as the post office, and the usual collection of enterprises that appear wherever enough people gather to create a market for whiskey and hardware. Sheriff Dale Oaks ran the jail at the south end of Main Street with the tired competence of a man who had seen enough to be rarely surprised. Clara Sutton's rented room was above the feed store, accessed by an exterior staircase that she had fixed herself in the spring when the third step cracked through. Her arrangement with Mr. Pell, the feed store owner, was that she paid half rate on the room in exchange for keeping his accounts 2 evenings a week. It was the kind of practical arrangement Clara assembled around herself the way other women assembled households, quietly, without drama, so that the necessary things got done. She had one friend in Cutter's Bend who she would have called a real friend rather than a pleasant acquaintance. That was Dorothy Vane, who ran the millinery shop on the north end of Main Street and had the rare quality of saying what she meant without apology while also being genuinely kind, which in Clara's experience was a combination worth holding on to when you found it. It was Dorothy who had first introduced Clara to Ward Ellison. Ellison was the manager of the Cutter's Bend branch of the Continental Land and Cattle Company, which owned a significant portion of the valley floor and employed a significant portion of the valley's men. He was polished in the way that certain men from eastern cities are polished when they arrive in western towns, smooth-spoken, well-dressed, careful about the impression he made. He had been attentive to Clara in a way she had been flattered by and slightly wary of simultaneously. She had let him take her to Sunday dinner twice. She had not let him take liberties. But she had, without fully understanding it, seen things in the course of her nursing work that were dangerous to have seen. She had been at the rail depot one evening in July, waiting for a supply shipment, when she overheard Ellison talking to two men she did not recognize. What she heard had not made complete sense to her at the time. Land surveys, deed numbers, the name of a judge, a number large enough that it caused her breath to catch. She had not understood the whole picture, but she had understood that what was being arranged was wrong. She had not known what to do with that knowledge. She had not told anyone. She had turned it over in her mind for 2 months, tried to determine whether what she had heard was what she thought it was, tried to determine who in Cutter's Bend could be trusted with it. She had taken too long. Ellison had noticed her that evening at the depot. He had noticed the slight change in her face when she saw him. He was a careful man, and careful men notice small changes. By September, he had decided she was a problem that needed to be solved before he had the chance to speak. The men he hired were from outside the valley. They knew the ridge trail. They knew the rail schedule. And Clara, walking back from Margaret Harmon's farm on a Thursday evening, carrying an empty medicine basket and thinking about supper, had no idea any of it was coming, until it was already happening. Reid Calloway had been in Cutter's Bend for 11 days when it happened. He had not planned to stay that long. He had stopped because his horse had thrown a shoe 2 miles south of town, and the nearest smithy was in Cutter's Bend, and he needed the shoe fixed before he could go anywhere. That was the entirety of his plan. Get the shoe fixed, move on south toward the Utah line, where he had heard a large spread outside of Cedar City was taking on riders for the fall gather. He was 32 years old and had been moving steadily in some direction or another for 2 years without accumulating much beyond trail dust and a reputation for being good with horses and better with a gun and unlikely to stay anywhere past the point where staying got complicated. He had not always been that way. There had been a time, not so long ago, when Reid Calloway was the kind of man who planted things, put down roots, made plans, thought in terms of years rather than the next county. He had owned a small horse ranch in Montana Territory with his brother, James. They had built it together over 4 years from raw land into something real. James had been the talker, the one who could charm a buyer or smooth over a dispute with a handshake and a grin. Reid had been the one who did the work that didn't show. The fencing, the breaking, the pre-dawn hours in the barn with a sick foal. They had been building something. And then 3 men had come in the night over a boundary dispute that was really a land grab dressed up as a boundary dispute. And in the morning, James was gone, and Reid had burned the ranch to the ground rather than let the men who had killed his brother have what they had killed him for. And he had gotten on his horse and pointed it south, and he had not stopped moving in any meaningful sense since. He was not proud of the burning. He was also not sorry for it. He held both things together the way you hold things that are true even when they contradict each other. What he carried with him, besides the horse and the gun and the particular competence of a man trained hard, was the ability to read a situation faster than most people. His father had called it the family curse, the Calloway tendency to see what was actually happening rather than what people were presenting. It had been useful on the ranch. On the road, it had kept him alive more than once. It was what he was doing, sitting outside the Cutter's Bend livery waiting for the smithy to finish the shoe when he saw the smoke. It rose from the embankment above the rail line, orange and black against the evening sky, moving fast in the dry September air. He was on his feet before he understood why. Something in the smoke was wrong. Not brush fire. Too deliberate. Set in a line along the embankment. The way you set a fire if you wanted to block a particular path to a particular place. He looked at the rail line below. He looked at the position of the sun. He thought about the evening train schedule that was posted on the depot board. He went for his horse at a run. The smithy shouted something after him. He did not stop. He hit the embankment at a gallop and drove the horse straight into the smoke line. He felt the heat hit his face and arms like a wall. The horse screamed and surged, and he talked it through. Low, constant, demanding, asking for the one thing horses are not built to do, which is move toward fire rather than away. The animal gave him what he asked. He did not take a breath until they were through the worst of it and descending the far side, and by then he could already see the rail line below and the shape on it, and the headlamp of the engine appearing around the mountain curve. He did not think about the mathematics of whether there was enough time. Thinking about mathematics when there is no longer enough time is just a way of dying while standing still. He rode. Clara came back to herself in pieces. The ringing in her ears first, a high, solid wall of sound from the train's passage that slowly thinned to silence. Then the smell, smoke and iron, and the disturbed earth scent of the gravel bank. Then the weight above her, a man's weight, solid and real, the body that had thrown itself between her and the train's displaced air. He was already lifting himself back, checking her, not himself, which she noticed even through the disorientation. "Can you hear me?" he said. "Yes." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Are you hit? Did anything catch you before I got the rope?" She took stock. Her wrists were bleeding where the ropes had torn the skin. Her spine ached from the rails. Her whole body was shaking in the deep involuntary way of someone whose nervous system is only beginning to understand that it survived. But nothing was broken. Nothing was wrong in the way that could not be lived with. "I'm all right," she said. "Your sleeve?" He looked at his left arm. The coat sleeve had burned through at the forearm, the skin beneath it red and raw. He registered this with the same calm expression she would come to understand was simply how his face worked. Not the absence of feeling, but the refusal to let feeling run the situation. "That can wait," he said. "It cannot," Clara said, and pushed herself to sitting. "Burns go septic faster than cuts. You need water and clean cloth on that in the next 10 minutes. She looked at him directly for the first time. Gray eyes, dark hair matted with sweat, a face that had been lived in hard. She did not know him. She knew she had never seen him in Cutter's Bend before. "Who are you?" "Reid Calloway. I was getting my horse shod." A pause. "I saw the smoke. You rode through the fire. The long way around would have taken too long." Clara stared at him. Something about the plainness of that statement. No drama in it. No performance of heroism. Just the flat logic of a man who had calculated the options and chosen the one that worked. Hit her somewhere in the chest in a way she did not immediately have words for. "Clara Sutton," she said. "I do something like nursing here. I need to look at that burn." He almost smiled. "Not quite. All right." Getting up the bank was harder than she would have liked to admit. Her legs were still shaking, and the gravel kept shifting under her boots. And twice she would have gone down if Reid Calloway's hand had not appeared at her elbow at exactly the right moment. He did not make a production of it. He simply steadied her and kept moving. His horse was at the bottom of the embankment, trembling and wide-eyed but whole, and Clara ran her hands over its legs while Reid watched. "She's all right," Clara said. "She is braver than she had any reason to be." She looked up at him. "So are you." He said nothing, but he looked at her in a way that told her the words had landed. They came into Cutter's Bend from the south end, Reid walking the horse, Clara beside him, and the town came out to meet them before they reached the main street. Someone had seen the fire on the embankment. Word had already moved in that fast, unstoppable way that word moves in small towns. Sheriff Oakes was at the front of the gathering, and his face when he saw Clara's wrists went from concern to something harder and colder. "Miss Sutton," he said. "Who did this?" Clara took a breath. She had been deciding on the walk back what to say and how to say it. She had spent 2 months being uncertain. She was not uncertain anymore. "Ward Ellison ordered it," she said, clearly and in full. "I will tell you everything I know. But first someone needs to see to Mr. Calloway's arm." Doc Harker's office was a single room above the barber shop, clean and practical, smelling of carbolic and pine resin. He was a compact man in his 60s who had seen everything and been surprised by very little of it in the last decade. But even he looked twice at the state of Clara's wrists before getting methodically to work. Reid sat in the chair by the window while Clara, ignoring the doctor's instructions to lie down, cleaned and wrapped his burned forearm herself. She worked quickly and without fuss, the way a person works when they know what they are doing and do not need praise for it. "You have done this before," Reid said. "Many times." She tied off the bandage. "Does it hurt?" "Some. It will hurt more tomorrow." She sat back. "You should keep it dry for a week. Change the dressing morning and evening. Come find me if it goes red or hot past the edges of the burn." "Yes, ma'am," he said, with a dryness that made her look up. He was watching her with those level gray eyes. How are your wrists? Manageable. She paused. I have had worse. From what? From the homestead I ran at 18. She said it simply, without self-pity. Wire fencing and cold mornings are hard on hands. The rails are not so different. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you were walking that trail alone. I walk it twice a week. In the evening. Margaret Harmon does not need medicine less in the evening than she does in the afternoon. He did not argue the point. Something moved behind his eyes, not criticism she understood. Something closer to recognition. The look of a person who has also been in the habit of doing necessary things regardless of what they cost. Sheriff Oakes came up the stairs with his deputy, a young man named Cord Pickett who had been the job 8 months and still took notes with the focus of someone who understood that the notes might matter later. Oakes sat across from Clara and listened without interruption while she told him everything. The evening at the depot, what she had overheard, the land scheme she had pieced together, the reason she had not spoken sooner, the men on the ridge trail, the rail line, all of it. When she finished, the room was quiet. Ellison, Oakes said. He said it the way a man says a name when he is revising a long-held assessment. He had the most to lose if I spoke, Clara said. The deed fraud alone would have cost him the company's trust. The judge he named would have been removed from a bench. There was a great deal of money at stake. I know Ellison, Oakes said slowly. He is careful. He will not have left tracks. He will have left some, Clara said. The men he hired are not from here. They will have needed paying. Payment leaves records if you know where to look. Oakes looked at her with something that was not quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. You have thought this through. I have had 2 months to think it through. I was waiting until I was certain. She met his eyes steadily. I am certain now. Reid Calloway had said nothing during any of this. He stood by the window with his bandaged arm and his hat in his hand, and listened with the complete attention of a man who understands that staying quiet is sometimes the most useful thing available. When Oakes looked at him, he said simply, I will ride with your deputy if you need to cover ground quickly. I know how to track. Oakes considered him. You are passing through. I was, Reid said. Oakes put a deputy outside Clara's staircase that night, and another at the north end of Main Street. It was the best he could do with the men he had until he could get word to the territorial marshal's office, which could take 2 days minimum. 2 days was a long time when the man who had ordered you tied to a rail line was still in town. Clara sat at her desk above the feed store and did not sleep. She graded the reading exercises she had promised to help Dorothy's neighbor's children with, because the work was real and it was in front of her, and she had never believed in letting fear paralyze the ordinary necessities of life. She made 2 cups of tea and let them go cold. She watched the lamp throw shadows on the ceiling. At 9:30, boots on the exterior staircase. She was at the door before the knock because she had been listening to that staircase for hours. It was Reid. He had a lantern and the particular look of a man who has not been able to sleep either and has decided to stop pretending otherwise. I want to make sure the deputy was where he was supposed to be, he said. Is he? He is. He paused. I also wanted to see how you were. Clara looked at him for a moment. The lamp behind her threw the landing into soft, uncertain light. She stepped back from the door. Come in, she said. I have tea, though it has gone cold. He came in and sat at her table, and she put the kettle back on. And they talked for 2 hours in the way that people talk when the ordinary barriers between them have been stripped away by an extraordinary event, and neither of them has the energy left to perform the usual distance. She told him about her father and the homestead, and the 2 years of building herself back from nothing that had left her competent and efficient, and sometimes, in the quiet evenings, aware of a particular hollow in the center of things she had not fully found words for. He told her about Montana and James and the ranch they had built together and the night that ended it and the 2 years of moving since. He told it without dramatics, in plain sentences, the way a man tells a thing when he has finally decided the weight of carrying it alone is more than the risk of putting it down somewhere. Clara listened the way she gave everything her full attention, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually receiving what he said, turning it over, understanding it. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You burned it so they could not have it, she said. Yes. I would have done the same thing." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, the slight loosening of something he had been holding very tight for a very long time. "I know," he said. "I could tell that about you from the rail bank." "What could you tell from a rail bank?" "That you are the kind of person who does not let the wrong people win if she can help it." He paused, even when helping it costs her. Clara held his gaze for a long moment. The fire on the embankment, the sleeve burning through, the blade moving faster than fear. "Thank you," she said, "for the fire. For all of it. You already thanked me." "I know. I am thanking you again because the first time I was in shock and it did not come out right." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "There and gone, but real. Stop right here for one moment. Because what just happened between these two people, in that small room, over cold tea, in the middle of the night after the worst day of Clara Sutton's life, is the thing this whole story is built on. Two people putting something down they have been carrying alone for too long. If you're watching this channel and you have not subscribed yet, this is your moment. Because the story is about to go places that are going to need you to be here for them. Subscribe to the channel right now. Hit the bell. Do not let what comes next find you somewhere else. Oak sent word to the territorial marshal's office on Friday morning. The reply came back Saturday. 2 marshals on their way, expected Monday. That meant the weekend with Ellison still in Cutter's Bend and no official authority to move on him yet. Oakes did the next best thing and paid Ellison a visit Friday afternoon, making it clear that the sheriff's office was aware of the situation and that certain movements would be noticed. It was the kind of visit that is meant to communicate a warning without providing anything actionable, and Oakes was experienced enough to deliver it well. Ellison received it with the smooth composure of a man who had been preparing for contingencies. What he did not prepare for was Clara Sutton having the presence of mind, in the days following the attack, to begin quietly documenting everything she knew with the methodical precision of a woman who had kept accounts and managed a homestead and understood that paper was more durable than memory. She sat at her desk each morning and wrote it all down. Dates, names, the specific language she had heard at the depot, the figures she remembered, the name of the judge. She wrote 2 copies of everything and gave one to Sheriff Oakes and kept one herself in the locked drawer of the desk where she also kept her savings. "You are building a case," Reid said, reading over her shoulder on Saturday afternoon. He had taken to stopping by in the mornings on his way to help Gideon Cross at the livery. He had offered his labor in exchange for keeping his horse there while the situation resolved, and again in the evenings. It had become unremarkable. The deputy on the stairs had stopped giving him questioning looks by the second day. "Someone has to," Clara said. "The marshals will need something to work from. You have a good memory for specifics. I spent 2 years managing feed costs and crop yields and loan payments. You learn to hold numbers accurately." She looked up at him. "You are hovering." "I am reading." "You are hovering while reading. There's a chair. Use it." He used it, and the afternoon passed in the easy way that afternoons were beginning to pass between them. Clara writing, Reid reading, or sharpening his knife, or simply being present in the particular manner of a person who does not need to fill a room with noise to justify occupying it. She had never shared her space with anyone who was quiet in that specific way. It was, she found, not something she wanted to analyze too carefully, because analyzing it required acknowledging how much she had come to look forward to it. Dorothy Vane, who missed nothing, cornered Clara on Saturday evening outside the millinery. "The man who rode through the fire," Dorothy said, without preamble. "Reid Calloway," Clara said. "He has been at your staircase every morning and evening since Thursday. The sheriff recommended people check on me regularly." The sheriff recommended it. Mr. Calloway appears to have taken it as a personal mandate. Dorothy studied her with affectionate attention. "Clara, when is the last time someone took care of you?" Clara opened her mouth to say something sensible and closed it again. "I thought so," Dorothy said. Sunday morning brought clouds off the mountains and the smell of coming rain, and Reid appeared at the staircase with 2 cups of coffee from the hotel dining room and the information that the deputy had gone off rotation at dawn because Oakes had received a wire saying the marshals were coming faster than expected, early Monday rather than midday. "That is good," Clara said, accepting the coffee. "Ellison will know by this afternoon." He will either run or dig in. He will dig in, Reid said. He does not seem like a man who runs. No. She looked out at the street, gray and quiet in the Sunday morning. He seems like a man who believes the story he is telling himself, that everything he did was practical and reasonable, and that I am the problem in it. Reid was quiet for a moment. Then, my brother was like that. Not crooked, but certain. He always believed that the story he was telling was the right one. A pause. I miss that about him, actually. That certainty. I never had it the way he did. Clara looked at him. It was the first time he had spoken about James with anything other than the plain, factual accounting of loss. This was something different, something more like grief, which is grief's honest form. What was he like, she said. He told her. He talked for a long time, and Clara listened the way she always listened, and at some point the coffee went cold and neither of them noticed. He told her about James teaching him to ride, about the first winter on the Montana property when they had lost 11 head to a blizzard and had to rebuild from almost nothing, about the way James laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them, which should have been irritating and somehow never was, about the last morning and what he had found and what he had done next. I did not go back, Reid said. I never went back to that part of Montana. I keep thinking I will someday, that I will go back and see what is there now and make some kind of peace with it. You will go when you are ready, Clara said. How will I know when I am ready? She considered this. I think you will stop being able to imagine moving on before you go there. I think it will feel less like something you're going toward and more like something you no longer need to get away from. She paused. That is how it worked with the homestead, for me. The day I stopped dreaming about going back to fix it was the day I understood I was actually done with it. Reid looked at her for a long moment. You are a remarkably clear-thinking person. I have had a lot of practice. At which part? At losing things and deciding what to do next. He was quiet. Then, very carefully, like a man choosing words that matter, I am glad I did not keep riding past Cutter's Bend. Clara felt the weight of that sentence land. She understood what it was and was not saying. She held it honestly, without deflecting it. I'm glad too, she said, though I could have wished for a less dramatic introduction. The ghost of his smile. I do not know. Dramatic introductions are clarifying. What did it clarify? That you're someone who fights for herself, even when fighting does not have any practical chance of working. You were tied to those rails, and you were still fighting. He met her eyes. That tells you who a person is. Clara did not look away. What did it tell you? That you are someone worth riding through fire for. The rain started outside, soft and steady, and the street emptied of the few Sunday morning pedestrians, and for a long moment neither of them said anything else. There are words that take all the space in a room once they have been spoken, and Reid Calloway's words were like that. Clara sat with them and understood that something was being offered, and understood further that she had the choice of how to receive it. She had been careful for a long time. She had been practical and efficient and self-sufficient, and all the things that a woman in her position needed to be. She had not permitted herself to want things that seemed impractical. She had not given room to the particular hollow in the center of things that Dorothy had seen clearly and she had refused to name. She looked at the man across the table from her. The burned forearm in its clean bandage. The careful gray eyes. The quality of stillness in him that was not coldness. She understood that now, completely, but the steadiness of someone who has decided what they stand for and stopped wavering. You are still passing through, she said. I was, he said. And the way he said it, the slight weight on the past tense, told her everything. This is the moment in a story where everything is balanced on the edge of a single decision, where two people are standing at the door of something real, and the only question is whether they're going to walk through it or let it close. If you're not subscribed to this channel, you're standing at your own version of that door right now. The best part of this story is still ahead. Subscribe. Stay. Because what Clara does next is the part that earns everything that comes after it. The Marshals arrived Monday at 10:30 on the morning train. Two men named Fitch and Dolores, practical and efficient, and well used to the particular texture of land fraud cases in the territory, which had been running at a high rate since the railroad pushed the land value north. Clara gave her full account in Sheriff Oakes's office for 2 hours. She presented her written documentation, the 2 copies she had made, the dated and specific record of everything she had heard and observed. Fitch read it twice. Dolores asked precise questions that Clara answered with equal precision. When they were done, Fitch sat back and looked at her. "Miss Sutton, this is a thorough accounting." "I know what I heard," Clara said. "I also know that knowing something and being able to prove it are 2 different problems, and I tried to give you tool for the second one as well as the first. You have done our job half for us. I want him to face what he did. I would like it done correctly so that he cannot find a procedural way out of it." Reid waited outside the sheriff's office. He was there when she came out, standing in the flat Monday morning light with his hat in his hand, and the fact of him being there, having waited, settled something in her chest that had been uncertain for days. "Well," he said, "they are moving on him this afternoon. The judge is a territorial appointment, so Ellison's influence does not reach him." She breathed. "It is in hand." "You did that," he said. "Oaks helped. The marshals did their work." "Clara." She looked at him. "You did that," he said again, quietly. "Not praise. Just the accurate accounting of what had happened. You built a record that makes it stick. You held it together for 2 months under pressure and then gave them exactly what they needed when the moment came." She held his gaze and let the truth of it land, because she had learned that dismissing accurate things was its own kind of dishonesty. "Yes," she said, "I did." The arrest of Ward Ellison happened at 2 in the afternoon outside the Continental Land and Cattle Company office, in front of half of Cutter's band, who found reasons to be in the vicinity of Main Street around that time. He went with the composure of a man who was already constructing his legal defense, which the marshals noted and found unsurprising. The 2 men he had hired to carry out the attack on Clara were brought in from the Ridge camps within the day. One of them had not moved on after the job, which was the mistake of a man who did not expect to be identified. Oaks came to find Clara that evening. "Ellison's books are going to take months to untangle," he said. "There is a federal case here that goes well past what happened to you. But Miss Sutton, what you provided was the thread they needed to start pulling. They would not have had that without you." "I know," Clara said. Oaks looked at her steadily. "You should also know that what those men did on the rail line is a hanging offense. The district attorney will pursue it." "Good," Clara said, simply without heat. "He should." The week that followed the arrest was the quietest week Clara had experienced in 2 months. The threat that had been sitting at the back of her mind like a stone she could not put down was gone. The tension in her shoulders, the hyper-awareness of footsteps on the staircase, the way she had been counting her exits every time she entered a room, all of it began to release. She had not fully understood how much of her energy it had been consuming until it was no longer consuming it. She slept a full night for the first time on Tuesday. On Wednesday, she rode out to Margaret Harmon's farm on the Ridge Trail and did not look over her shoulder once. On Thursday, Reid was waiting at the bottom of the staircase when she came back. "I heard you went up the ridge," he said. "Margaret needed her medicine." "I know." He paused. "I also know you went alone." "I always go alone." "I know that too." He looked at her in that direct, unhurried way. "I would like to go with you. Not because you cannot go alone. Because I would like to." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You have been offered the foreman position at the Cross T," she said. He blinked. "How did you know that?" "Gideon Cross told Mrs. Pell. Mrs. Pell told Dorothy. Dorothy told me." She held his gaze. "It is a real position. $35 a month in a private bunk. It means staying in Cutter's Bend." "I know what it means. Why are you considering it?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think I have been moving long enough. I think I was waiting to feel like stopping was safe. Like I had earned the right to put something down and not have it taken." He paused. "This feels like that. This place. These people." His eyes on hers. "You." Clara held the weight of that. She did not deflect it. She did not perform modesty about it, or wrap it in practicalities. "I am not easy to be around," she said. "I do things my own way, and I do not ask for help readily, and I have strong opinions about most things." "I know," he said. "I have been around you for 2 weeks. And I think you're the most honest person I have met in a very long time." He took one step toward her. "I am not asking you to be different. I am asking you if I can stay." Clara Sutton, who had rebuilt herself from nothing twice and carried her stones alone and been strong enough for everything, looked at the man in front of her. The burned sleeve, the steady eyes, the quality of stillness that she now understood was simply the way he was, and understood that some things are not weakness. That letting something in is not the same as giving something up. That the hollow in the center of things has a name, and the name is want, and wanting is not a failure. Yes, she said, you can stay. Reid took the cross-tee position on a Friday and started the following Monday. And within a week, Gideon Cross was telling anyone who would listen that he had hired the best foreman the ranch had seen in 20 years. Whether this was entirely true or only largely true, the results were visible enough that no one argued the point. Reid worked with the same methodical completeness he brought to everything, learning the land, the cattle, the rhythms of the operation, and by the end of the first month had earned the respect of every hand on the crew in the way that matters on a cattle ranch, which is to say through the work itself and nothing else. Every evening he rode into Cutter's Bend. The visits became the kind of thing that a town accepts and eventually forgets to notice, because the ordinary miracle of two people building something together has a way of becoming simply part of the landscape. Dorothy Vane noticed, of course. Dorothy noticed everything, but her noticing expressed itself only as a warm smile when she saw them pass the millinery window, which Clara allowed her without comment. They rode the Ridge Trail together on Thursday evenings. Clara doing the nursing work, Reid carrying the supplies, and keeping his opinions about her pace to himself. Mostly, she taught him the names of the plants along the trail, the ones with medicinal properties, the ones that were merely decorative, the ones to avoid. He told her about the cattle, about the specific personalities of the horses he was working, about the land east of the ranch where the grass ran thick and gold in October and was the most straightforwardly beautiful thing he had seen in years. Take me there, Clara said. He did. On a Sunday in October, they rode east from the cross-tee into the long grassland with the Absarica rising white-capped behind them. And the grass was exactly as he had described, and Clara pulled her horse up and sat for a long time without speaking, and he did the same, and it was the kind of silence that is not empty. I am glad I stayed in Cutter's Bend, he said. She looked at him sideways. The horse needed a shoe. Yes, he said. Lucky thing. She smiled. It changed her face in the way that a genuine smile changes a face that has not done it carelessly, completely, all at once. He had been waiting to see it like that, open and unguarded, and it was worth the wait. That evening, sitting on the steps of her staircase in the fading October light, he told her that he loved her. He said it the way he said everything that mattered, plainly, without ornament, as a statement of fact that he had arrived at carefully and was offering without conditions. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have been in love with you since you sat at my table in the rain and talked about your brother. That was the third day. I know. She looked at him steadily. I have been thinking it through ever since, making sure it was real and not gratitude or shock or loneliness. I have been thinking about it very carefully. And it is real. She paused. I love you, Reid. I have loved you for a while now. I was waiting until I was certain, because I do not say things I do not mean. I know you do not, he said. It is one of the things I love about you. He took her hand, careful of the scar tissue still pink at her wrists, and she let him, and they sat in the October evening while the town moved around them and the mountain showed its last light, and nothing about it was complicated at all. They married in December, in the small church at the north end of Cutter's Bend, on a cold, bright Saturday that brought out most of the town and all of Dorothy Vane, who cried openly and made no apology for it. Clara wore her best dress, which was deep blue wool, and pinned her hair back herself because she had no family to help with it and Mrs. Holbrook from the boarding house. She had traveled from Dusty Fort for the occasion, had offered and been gently declined because some things Clara was going to do her own way until the last. She walked down the aisle of that church alone, as she had done most things, and held her head exactly level. And when she reached Reid at the altar, she looked at him with her direct and honest eyes and said the words she meant with her whole self and none of the usual hedging. Reid Calloway, for his part, looked at the woman walking toward him with the specific expression of a man who understands that he is in the presence of something he does not deserve and intends to spend the rest of his life being worthy of. They said their vows simply and clearly, because they were both people who said what they meant. When it was done, and the church broke into the kind of noise that cold December churches produce when everyone has been holding it in, Reid caught Clara's hands in both of his and looked at her for a long moment before anyone else could reach them. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. And then she laughed, the wide, unguarded laugh that was still rare enough to be remarkable. And he pulled her close and held her in the middle of the church with the whole town watching, and she did not pull away. They found a house on the east edge of town, close enough to the school for Clara to walk and close enough to the cross-T road for Reid to ride out easily. It was small and needed work, and they did the work together on weekends and evenings because they were both people who understood that the things worth having require the work that does not show. The spring brought the Ellison trial. Clara testified for 2 days, clearly and without flinching, presenting her documented account to a territorial court that had seen many land fraud cases but few witnesses as organized as she was. Ellison received 12 years in the territorial prison. The men who had tied her to the rail line received sentences longer than that. The judge whose name had appeared in Ellison's arrangements was removed from the bench and faced separate charges. Clara walked out of that courthouse into the April sunlight with Reid beside her and breathed the clean air and felt the weight of the whole long business finally leave her body. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he agreed. She turned to face him. "What do you want to do now?" He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. "I want to go home," he said. "I want to have supper with my wife. I want to sit on the porch and watch the light go off the mountains." Clara smiled. "That is a good plan." "I think so." They went home. Supper. The porch. The light going slowly off the mountains to the west. The sky moving through its colors. Gold, pink, the deep clear blue of a high-altitude evening. "I want to go to Montana," Reid said after a while. Clara looked at him. "Not to stay. Just to see it. To go back to where James is buried and stand there for a while and say the things I've been carrying." He paused. "I think I am ready." She remembered what she had told him months ago, that you will stop being able to imagine moving on before you go there, that it will feel less like something you're going toward and more like something you no longer need to get away from. "Yes," she said. "You are ready. Will you come with me?" She took his hand. "I will go anywhere with you." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I never thought I would say that to anyone again, that I wanted them with me in a place that mattered." "I know," Clara said. "I never thought I would let anyone be that to me." She looked out at the mountains. "We are both going to have to get used to it. I think I can manage that," he said. She leaned against his shoulder. He folded his arm around her. The night came in over the valley, soft and full of stars, and from inside the house they could hear nothing but their own silence, which was the silence of two people who had found, against the odds, the particular person who made the noise in them go quiet. Time in the valley moved the way time moves in a place that has decided it is worth staying in. The cross-T grew under Reid's management. By the second year, he was overseeing a crew of 12, and Gideon Cross, advancing in age and happy to let capable hands hold the reins, had begun to speak openly about what would happen to the operation when he was ready to step back. By the third year, the conversation became a proposal, a partnership stake worked toward over 5 years, with full ownership available at the end of a decade if Reid wanted it. Reid discussed it with Clara across the kitchen table for one evening and accepted the following morning. He was, for the first time in 3 years, building something. Clara continued her nursing work and added to it. By the second year, she had more patients than she could reasonably carry alone, and she wrote to the Territorial Medical Board requesting support for a proper clinic in Cutter's Bend. The response took 8 months and 3 follow-up letters, each one more precisely argued than the last. And then a grant arrived, and then a doctor, a young man named Whitfield who was fresh from his training and humble enough to understand that Clara Sutton knew more about the practical health of Cutter's Bend than he would for at least a year. They worked well together. The clinic served the valley and the surrounding farms, and Margaret Harmon on the ridge, and the families whose children Clara had been seeing through fevers and broken bones on her own for 2 years. Dorothy Vane, watching all of this, said to Clara one afternoon, "You built this town something it did not know it needed." "The town built itself," Clara said. "I just kept filling in the gaps." "That is what building is," Dorothy said. Reid and Clara went to Montana in the late spring of their second year together. They rode north through the greening country and crossed into the territory on a clear May morning, and Reid took her to the valley where the ranch had been. The land had been claimed by someone else. There was a new fence line, and the burned foundation was gone, grassed over, and he stood at the edge of what had been the property line and looked at it for a long time. Then he walked to the small cemetery at the valley edge where James was buried. Clara stood beside him and held his hand and said nothing, because nothing was what was needed. He said what he had been carrying. When he was done, the silence was different, lighter. "All right," he said after a while. "All right," Clara agreed. They rode south. Their first child, a girl, arrived in the 3rd year of their marriage, a December baby born in the same small house, with Dorothy Vane and Dr. Whitfield both present and Reid in the hall outside the door, which Clara had closed firmly because she was perfectly capable of having a baby without him watching her do it. She named the girl Ellen, which had been her mother's name, and Reid held the baby with the careful, wondering gravity of a man who has not held something that small and that important before and understands the weight is different from everything else. "She's all right," he said, meaning Clara. "She is excellent," Dr. Whitfield said from the doorway. Reid breathed for the first time in 6 hours. The second child, a boy, came 2 years after Ellen. They named him James because some names need carrying forward, and because Reid said it quietly one evening and Clara knew immediately that it was right. James Calloway turned out to have his uncle's quality of easy certainty and his mother's precision with words, and grew up in Cutter's Bend knowing that he was named for a man who had built something worth grieving. Dorothy Vane was not present for either birth. She had her own circumstances by then, having married the new land surveyor who arrived in Cutter's Bend in the 4th year and been characteristically direct about her intentions toward him from the first week. Clara was at that wedding with Reid beside her, and when Dorothy walked to the altar, Clara pressed her knuckles briefly to her lips because it was Dorothy and it was the right outcome, and she was not going to cry at a wedding, but it was close. The years moved through their seasons. The children grew. Ellen learned to ride before she could reliably spell her own name. James took up his father's habit of quiet and his mother's habit of careful documentation, and by the time he was 12 was keeping better records of the ranch's seasonal accounts than some of the hired hands. Reid taught them both to shoot with the methodical patience of a man who had learned from a father who understood that precision is taught slowly or not at all. Clara taught them everything else: reading, arithmetic, the names of plants, the proper way to clean a wound, the difference between what is true and what people would like to be true. They were a family in the way that families are when they are built by two people who chose each other consciously and kept choosing each other on all the ordinary days when the choice was not dramatic. On their 10th anniversary, Reid took Clara to the rail line. Not the spot where she had been tied. The rail bed had been rebuilt the previous year and the exact location was under new gravel. But close enough. They stood on the embankment above the tracks in the September evening, the Absarka behind them, the valley spreading south in the last light. "I keep thinking about it," Reid said, "about how close it was, about what would have happened if I had not seen the smoke when I did. If the horse had stumbled on the embankment, if my blade had been slower." "You did not miss," Clara said. "No, but I almost did not stop in this town at all." She was quiet for a moment. She had thought about this too. The particular mathematics of near misses that did not happen, of contingencies that resolve in the right direction by margins too thin to look at too closely. "We cannot live in the almost," she said. "I learned that very early. The homestead almost did not fail. My father almost did not die when he did. I almost did not leave Denver when I did. All those almosts, and I still ended up on this embankment on a September evening with you." She looked at him. "What I know is this. You saw the smoke, and you chose to ride toward it. You did not have to. You chose to. That is the part that is not almost." He looked at her for a long moment. You gave me back the ability to choose something, he said. I had been riding for 2 years because choosing anything felt like it was going to cost me the way it cost me with James. And then I met you, and the cost of choosing felt different because you were worth it in a way I could actually measure. How do you measure it? Every morning, he said simply. Every morning I wake up, and it is different from the mornings I spend on the road. That is the measure. Clara looked at the tracks below them. The rail line that had nearly been her end and had become, instead, the beginning of everything. She turned to him. I'd like to go home, she said. Our children are waiting. Dorothy is watching them, and she is wonderfully patient, but she is not infinitely patient. He laughed, the full, genuine sound that had taken months to come and that she still considered one of the best sounds she knew. All right. They rode back to Cutter's Bend together in the September evening, side by side, the mountains going dark behind them and the lights of the town appearing one by one in the valley below, and Clara thought about what it meant to have a place you were riding toward. To have something that pulled you home as reliably as gravity. She had built that from nothing. They had built it together. From a burning embankment and a blade moving faster than fear in a room above a feed store on a rainy Sunday morning. From two people who had each lost something enormous and had found, in each other, the first thing that made the loss make sense. Reid Calloway took full ownership of the Cross T Ranch in the 12th year of his marriage to Clara. By then, it was the most productive spread in the Northern Valley, known for the quality of its horses as much as its cattle, and employing 14 men year-round. James, at 16, was already working summers as a junior hand and learning the business side from his mother's example of keeping clear accounts and speaking plainly. Ellen, at 15, announced she intended to study medicine. Not nursing. Medicine. She sat at the supper table on a Tuesday evening and looked at both her parents in that level. Direct way she had inherited in equal measure from both of them, daring either of them to tell her it was not possible. Neither of them did. Clara said, "You will need mathematics through calculus and a strong working knowledge of chemistry. We will start Saturday." Reid said, "Which school?" Ellen blinked. She had prepared for more resistance than that. "I'm still researching," she said. "Let me know when you decide," Reid said, and went back to his supper. Ellen became a doctor. She practiced for 40 years in Wyoming Territory and later the state of Wyoming, and when people asked her later in life what had made her believe she could do it, she said, "My mother, obviously, and the fact that my father never once suggested otherwise." The rail line through Cutter's Bend was widened in the 18th year. The construction crew found, in the drainage ditch below the embankment, a fragment of rope that no one could identify. The crew foreman, a local man who knew the story, had it mounted and sent to the Calloway house. It hung on the wall of Reid and Clara's front room for the rest of their lives. Dorothy Vane's grandchildren grew up alongside the Calloway children and called them aunt and uncle. Cutter's Bend grew into a proper town with a school board and a library and a medical clinic that bore no one's name because Clara had refused the naming committee 3 times, saying that buildings named after people tended to obscure the fact that the building existed to serve everyone in it. Sheriff Oakes retired and was replaced by Cord Pickett, who had been the earnest deputy with the careful notes and had grown into exactly the kind of lawman Oakes had hoped he would. He kept the documented account of the Ellison case in the office filing cabinet for 30 years as a reference for how to build a land fraud case. And he showed it to every young deputy who came through as an example of a witness who understood that knowing something and being able to prove it were 2 different problems. Reid Calloway was 70 years old when he died on a September morning, the same month in which everything important in his life had happened. He died in the bed he had shared with Clara for 38 years. With both his children in the house and Ellen's hands on his wrist, reading his pulse the way her mother had taught her. And the last thing he said, clearly and with the precision that had characterized everything he ever said that mattered, was Clara's name. She buried him on the ranch, on the east side where the grass ran thick and gold in October, the place he had taken her to see on that first autumn Sunday, and that they had ridden to 100 times since. She lived another 11 years. She spent them the way she had spent everything. Usefully, precisely, without complaint. She continued her work at the clinic until she was 80. She taught her grandchildren the names of the plants on the Ridge Trail. She wrote, in the last years a long and detailed account of everything that had happened. The homestead, the arrival in Cutter's Bend, the embankment, the trial, the marriage, the building of the life. Not as a sentimental record, but as an accurate one, because she had always believed that accurate things lasted longer than comfortable ones. She was buried beside Reid on a November morning, under a sky the same cold blue as the day she had walked into that church in her best dress. At her graveside, her son James read from what she had written. He read the part about the rail line and the fire and the man who had ridden through it. He read the part about the rainy Sunday morning and the cold tea and the first conversation that had gone all the way down to the bottom of things. He read the part she had written about what it meant to let something in, her exact words, in her exact voice, as direct and clear as she had been in everything. It is not weakness to need the person standing next to you. It is only weakness if you pretend otherwise. I spent a long time pretending otherwise. I'm glad I stopped. The family stood in the October grass, and the mountains rose white behind them, and the rail line ran silver through the valley below, and the silence was the particular silence of a life that had been fully lived and would not be finished, because some lives, built properly and with enough intention, go on through the people who carry them forward. The rope on the wall of the Calloway house was eventually given to the Cutter's Bend Historical Collection. The card beside it read simply, "From the embankment, September 1879. He rode through fire." If this story reached you the way it was meant to, if Clara's fight and Reid's choice and everything they built between them landed somewhere real, then do one thing before you leave. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who would feel it. Leave a comment telling us which part of this story stayed with you. This channel exists because of the people who keep showing up for it. Thank you for being one of them. We will see you in the next one.